voting amendment bill. And I want to just pick up on some of what the Minister was discussing in his first reading speech, specifically around the fact, sir, that this as electoral legislation is the sort of legislation that does need to, in my view, and the Minister's view certainly, proceed on the basis of broad consensus. Because, sir, when we, and I talked a little bit about this in the debate around the MMP referendum, sir, but when we, as a parliament, look at matters to do with the way we elect this very House, we are dealing with matters that are of the most serious constitutional significance. And while certainly these bills can be passed on the strength of numbers, I think it is incumbent on us to make sure that we tread carefully down this road and do try to build that sort of cross-party consensus which is likely to make this sort of law that we pass not only respected but enduring. And I think if there's any lesson that we can all learn from the Electoral Finance Act passed for the last election, it is that these are serious issues. They're not the sort of issues that you want to exploit a position of power on, and you need to go back to some sort of broad consensus as far as you possibly can. And certainly, sir, that has been the government's approach to passing or introducing this bill today.
Let's hope that the other party...
I think, sir, the point to remember here is that very soon after coming into government following the 2008 election, we repealed the Electoral Finance Act, and from memory, sir, that repeal was broadly supported in this House. I certainly remember the Labour opposition agreeing that we did need to relook at that, and I think that was wise of them to concede their mistake on that point. And so what we've done since that time really is revert to electoral law as this country has known it for many, many years, building up to the passing of that Act. And so the discussion document in the issues paper that went out for public consultation and this bill that has resulted from that has started from electoral law pre the EFA, the Electoral Finance Act, and said, let's only look to make changes to that, sir, where there is a broad consensus of support for it. And I think when you're looking through the provisions in the bill in front of the House tonight, it is important to look at it in that context of starting from a stable position of electoral law that has served this country very well for a long period of time, saying there are issues we need to look at, but let's only make changes where we feel that there is a broad consensus of support for them. So if I can just start off actually on the smallest of the issues dealt with by the bill, and that's the one the Minister finished on, which is the advanced voting provision. I was actually lucky enough to be involved in the Justice and Electoral Committee when they had their inquiry into the last election and considered this issue. And it is an interesting one, sir, and perhaps one that the wider public haven't taken on board as yet. But the changes in this bill, sir, will enable a greater level of participation in our election days, and I think that is something that we all strive for. Our elections work best when there is a high level of engagement, and sir, if it's as simple as allowing voters to vote on a different day to election day without having to go through a complex process of improving their entitlement and filling out declarations, then sir, that's a simple enough thing that I think we in this House can and should do to encourage participation. So certainly, sir, that's a simple enough change to make. I think it's an important one to do, and I'm certainly very pleased to support that. So the biggest part of the bill relates to the running of the campaigns and campaign financing and who can advertise and how much can be spent and when do we measure from and those sorts of issues. And again, when you start the debate on these things, from my perspective, the issues we have to look at are the sort of issues that were really brought sharply into focus during the 2008 election campaign. And the biggest difficulty I think we all struggled with through that campaign was a lack of certainty and a lack of credibility of the very rules. And there was a constant process of going to the Electoral Commission and going to lawyers and trying to find out what could be done and who could do what and what counted and what didn't. And it got to the point, sir, where even if the Electoral Commission would say to you, look, candidate X has breached the rules, they'd say, but we really can't do anything about it because the rules are so unclear that no one really knows what's happening. And I think we have to take from that the importance of being very, very clear, very certain rules, and a good workability between the rules we operate under as MPs when we spend money in our capacity as members of Parliament and the money we spend and the regulations we're under when we're campaigning. And the waste of resources during that 2008 election campaign was a source of ongoing frustration to me, sir, because time and effort that should have been spent out talking to the public was spent trying to get our head around exactly what these rules all meant. Now, the last speaker spoke at some length around the regulated period, and I agree with her that that is indeed an important issue. And can I just again go back to the opening comment I made, which is that the 3-month regulated period is the period we have had in this country for a long time leading up to the Electoral Finance Act, and that is what we've gone back to, sir, as a starting point for these changes. Now, on the issue of retrospectivity, which Ms Dalziel spoke about, look, I'd agree that that is a serious concern, and can I just, by way of personal example, mention to this House that I was selected as a candidate in May of 2008, and yet all my expenditure from the 1st of January, a full 5 months before I even was chosen to be a candidate, was regulated. Now, so that's a nonsense. How on earth can you be responsible for expenditure that you might have spent in that period which could have served to encourage the public to vote for you? But that was the sort of crazy system we had. So, sir, what we've done is we've reverted back to a 3-month period, or a period that is defined by the calling of the election, to ensure, sir, that everybody knows once we are into the regulated period. I think that's really key. Now, tied in with that, and I think it is important to tie it in, is to look at the campaign expenditure limits for candidates. And, sir, under section 205B of this bill, or the new section 205B inserted by this bill, we now see those expenditure limits, which have been set at $20,000 inclusive of GST since God played fullback for the apostles, as they say, has now been changed there to reflect a CPI adjustment. Now, it only goes back as far as 2008, and the adjustment in the legislation as printed, sir, isn't a big one. The important aspect of them, though, is the section 266A, new section 266A, which this bill seeks to impose, which imposes the ability for annual ordering councils updating those CPI linkages. So, sir, it's a beginning, and it doesn't mean a big step forward in the campaign expenditure limits initially, but what it does finally put in place is some sort of mechanism to make sure that those limits do keep pace with inflation over time. And I think, sir, that is important. We address, in this bill, sir, we see address some important apportionment issues, as the Minister has discussed, to make sure, again, there's clarity around how and where campaign expenditure is apportioned. And so we have kept from the electoral finance regime the disclosure of donations and the regime around that, and in fact added to it, sir, the new requirement for political parties to have to disclose not only donations over a certain limit, but also income they've received in bands below that limit. So there is a more fulsome picture, sir, of the funding of our political parties, and I think that increase in transparency and clearing that up can only be a good thing, sir. I'm sure that as this bill goes through Select Committee, we are going to see some interesting discussion on some of the issues within the bill. But, sir, I'd like to end where I began, which is simply to say that unless we can find a broad consensus for some of these issues, I think, sir, it is dangerous to charge ahead, and that's why I think reverting back to the stable electoral law that we've worked under for so long is a good starting point. But I look forward, sir, in that Select Committee to a good and enlightened and educated debate on these matters, because they are important, sir. I'm looking forward to the process, and I commend the bill to the House.